Okay, hi, how you doing? My name is Albert Koshimune. This is for the UCLA Masters in Urban Education program. For the course, my final paper, autoethnography for ED 275 with Dr. Elexia McGovern. The title of this spoken word is the RACE, Race and Culture Ethnography of Albert Koshimune, from then till now. I remember the days, back in the early grades when excellent and satisfactory were given as praise. Back when we were too naive and led to believe that as long as we did well in school, that no matter what culture or race, that we could achieve all of our wildest dreams. I was a Japanese American boy, living amongst the dominant culture, where the ideologies were indoctrinated, repeated over and over. Like a student who was silenced with no creativity to disperse is worse than an MC spitting his lines without his verse. No power of voice, shrugged off by his peers and teachers as one of those Asian ESL boys. But I was fresh off a no boat. I was born in Glendale, California, moved to Torrance in the 310. But through the racial lens, I was simply Japanese, or might as well be Chinese, because through their perspective, we were just all representatives of the model minorities. Back in those days, the great 1990s, when slavery had been abolished but racism was prominent, led the ethnicities in the Los Angeles streets rioting as a result of the oppressive dominance. Now race just wasn't a simple black and white paradigm, a yin to yang, black versus white, like the contradiction of day against night. It was more the bleaching light machine which drove us to wash all of our so-called labeled sins, which washed our brains into being ashamed of our kin and embarrassed to be covered in our own skin. I could remember going to Saturday school, where I'll be called names during the American week like Jap, Gook, and Chink, but you wouldn't think that the Japanese kids would be just as cruel. It wasn't until I got a little bit older that the regret caught up with me, and the result of my conforming to the dominant surroundings were drowning me in ultraviolet rays of global warming, which were piercing through the epidermis with the emergence and disturbance to my cultural identity and purpose. I live in America, so what's the point of knowing Japanese if there's barely any over here, and the friends I've already made who went back overseas? So I found myself mimicking rap lyrics, media gimmicks, so I wouldn't be judged by the daunting prepubescent critics. Now let me be more specific. Race and culture was a constant battle for a biculturalist, where children's poking fingers were no fun, but I felt like rusty daggers. I was forced to numb myself to be emotionless. No matter what the notion is, I'll direct you to my racial tears so I can show you where the ocean is. But gender roles didn't allow boys to seem weak, so my hopes and dreams to feel free from these categories in society seem bleak. But week after week they keep judging me for race, gender, financial status, but I just want them to see me. But these people stay asleep. Nothing was more confusing listening to grandparents who had experienced the World War, where the racial slurs didn't resonate with me, and wondered why they even moved thousands of miles away on the other side of the world for. My Republican parents used to be dirt poor, so now their success has led them to judge others who don't try to strive harder in life to earn more. Even my parents were easily swayed by how the media portrayed urban communities like blacks and Hispanics today, who work so hard but for such little pay. I've gone home with tears pouring out my eyes, with the moment I realized that the circumstances and expectations of the other kids in my school weren't the same as mine. I was deemed a model minority. I was expected to be good at math, where school and education was a #1 priority. In a school from a district with a tracking system that separated the Asians from Caucasians and segregated the very few Hispanics and blacks that we had so poorly and horribly, because I met these kids and they were bilingual, or they were just a little too lazy or too carefree. But please explain to me why the majority of them were put in classes for special needs and put on special meds, when actually I think they can function normally. I remember those who were of privilege, with a percentage of descendants who settled in the States by pilgrimage, who have created a societal framework where they don't try to build from it. They keep the rich rich and the poor poor. The reason why they are still so rich, because they have perfected ways of making people comply to a necrophilic lie, for the oppressed are forced to a life of crime, using the banking and education as a weapon, so they'll try to steal from it. The next generation of my lineage were called the Nisei. The desperation of assimilating to American culture was what we faced, where our traditions and sense of belonging were simply replaced by the folk songs we were forced to sing along in our childhood upon the replay, when Japanese holidays were taken away from us in exchange for Hallmark holidays on the calendars for Columbus and V-Day. So I remind my students to not pay attention to the he say, she say. Only mind being humble and staying true to where we stay, so that we can practice through a dialogical approach to transform this madness, where students don't have to undergo the daily stress of the hood, surrounded by sex and drug traffic, gang assassins, leaving residents in panic, and hope that gentrification is not the only governmental tactic that'll make the streets placid. In my classroom, where the population is primarily black, I've clothed my walls with familiar faces so that my students could have a sense of empowerment, and book stands carrying relatable texts ornated with cultural artifacts. Jazz and hip-hop provided food for their souls, with pictures of their own people like MLK and Malcolm X, while their sense of pride continually grows, where their role models don't have to be street gangsters, drug dealers, and basketball pros, so as not to leave mothers and sisters to dance around poles. What most urban communities lack in their teaching are teachers who are driven to stay passionate and continue reaching out to where their actions speak louder than words without all the preaching. Where sacrifice means more to serve the hive, but uplifting lives like the end result of a bee sting. So I try to teach my lectures at the Community Prep Academy in a bicultural manner, so that I can raise child geniuses like Steve Urkel, because family really matters. Even through their financial hell, I bring up familiar, social, and aspirational wealth, which are all cultural capital that I have felt can be used to our advantage to win the pot with a full house from the cards they were dealt. So I continue to converse with my students, and I'm trying so hard to catch them up to speed to an appropriate grade level for computation and ability to read. But taking what I've learned in urban education and planting the seed, it is time for intervention, avoiding the presence of constant apprehension and stealing the confidence through detention. I will cry out for attention of why the school prison pipeline is not in question. Immersed in a community where my students have only been exposed to other African Americans, they have maintained their purity. They have involuntarily and momentarily have stayed colorblind. But I hope to bring awareness to other cultures and equip them with enough knowledge to gain success with full certainty, so that this capitalistic society doesn't fascinate them with currency, and they approach everybody with common courtesy, and enlighten their minds to combat racism in a culture peacefully, but with a sense of urgency, preferably. Thank you so much, Dr. Eduardo Lopez and Dr. Elexia McGovern. And I thank Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. If you have not read this, read this. And Antonia Darder, two people that I've been really looking up to as some role models in how I approach urban education. Shout outs to my crew, Dusty Crates, for giving me this platform of hip-hop to be able to reach these urban students. Thank you.